Tamboy sir, shall I start with introduction? Hello, Dr. Tamboy sir. Okay, without wasting time, I will start with the introduction because next task is the introduction. Okay, so very good evening to respected principal sir, all my dear colleagues and students, and especially good morning to Dr. Sangram Raut because they just started over there. Just I'm introducing my close friend Dr. Sangram. After completing pharmacy degree in India from GCOPK, Dr. Sangram sir went to the USA after qualifying GRE and TOEFL to pursue Master of Science in Industrial Pharmacy at St. John University, New York, where he was exposed to various aspects of pharmaceutical drug product development, especially early phase formulation and development. He then joined University of North Texas Health Sciences Center in 2009 for his PhD, which helped him to get advanced training in biochemistry, spectroscopy, nanotechnology, and biophysics in Dr. Grzyński's laboratory, where he gained valuable lessons about interdisciplinary collaboration and was exposed to multitude of research projects ranging from fundamental physics, chemistry to preclinical research. He completed his PhD in 2013. He then pursued postdoctoral work at Texas Christian University in biophysics department for next 3 years. In 2017, he joined along Dr. Laco as an assistant professor to work on research project in collaboration with early stage startup companies using existing intellectual property on nanoparticle based drug delivery. This experience exposed him to intellectual property, patent, business development, clinical research, clinicians, and grant writing. Over the years, he had held multiple academic positions like postdoctorate, lecturer, and assistant professor, and has published more than 60 research papers in reputed international journals and presented his research work in more than dozens of international conferences. He has taught many subjects over the year, including biochemistry, anatomy and physiology, biophysics, spectroscopy, and drug delivery, to name a few. Last year, Sangram made a transition from academia to pharma industry. Dr. Sangram sir is currently enjoying as an analyst in Reata Pharmaceuticals in clinical product development department. His role is at crossroad of medical writing, regulatory and clinical research activities. We at the Annasaheb Dange College of Pharmacy Ashta very grateful to have such an eminent personality joining us long away from 15,000 kilometers. So I request Dr. Sangram Raut sir to please guide our student and start your session. Please, sir.
Thank you, Professor Jagtap and Principal Sir and all the staff and students for joining at this inconvenient time to every one of you. So I appreciate that. So credit goes to the staff and students as well. I want to share my screen, so give me a minute. I just want to make sure I have the right PowerPoint presentation. Okay, can you please confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. So you can see my screen, right? Okay, all right. So without further ado, let's get into the session. So before we get into the session, let me tell you a small anecdote or a story when I joined my PhD. So what happened was, when I came to Texas from New York to start my PhD, so I met with my professor, or a guide you call it here, or a mentor. So it's an interesting personality that my guide has. They're brothers. There are two professors who are working in the same lab. So when I went to join them, we had an initial discussion that I want to do this, what's your lab works on and what not. And we got into the conversation. And then we talked about how is the thesis done, what kind of projects are done. And then he asked me whether I play table tennis or no. They call it a ping pong in America here somehow, for some reason, right? A lot of things are done differently in America than rest of the world. So, and I will tell you a couple of those examples in a minute. So he asked me if I play a table tennis. So I was like, yes, I do play table tennis. I used to play in India. And Professor Jagtap knows that we used to play tennis together, table tennis together. So he was like, oh, that's great. So I will give you two options. So one, either you work in my laboratory for 4 to 5 years and then you get a PhD, or you can beat me in table tennis and then I'll give you your PhD. So So why am I telling you this? So this is just another like benefit of going abroad and meeting interesting people, right? So just to give you an perspective. Anyways, so as I said, there are different means here we do things very differently. And one example is, you may know already that we drive on the right side of the road, right? Unlike rest of the world. That's just one example, right? So another example is we called colleges schools here. For example, we don't call College of Pharmacy, we call School of Pharmacy here, a School of Engineering. So if you hear me saying school in my presentation, remember I'm referring to a college, not a school like the school we know in India. Okay, so with that, so let's talk about little bit about foreign studies, especially in the US, because I've gone through that path. So I know a little bit about what goes on in the US education system. So I just want to give you some perspective or a little bit about that path, how I got here and how anyone else can get to US or any other country. So I had sent earlier Professor Jagtap a word page document about with several links to where you will find information about different schools, colleges, scholarships, funding, and the overall process of application. So he will share. He may have shared, or he will share it. Share the document with students soon. Okay, so let's get into the PowerPoint presentation here. So what I'm going to talk today is different types of programs that you will see in any universities outside India or specifically US. So what's the typical application process? What kind of exams you need to appear for or are required for? And then one important point is financial aid or scholarship opportunities. How do you manage all the expenses, right, when you apply for the US universities? So that's a big concern for many students in India. And then we'll follow that with the question and answer session. So I hope you have few questions and you will try to extract as much information as from me. So let's go to the next slide. So this is the different types of programs. So another difference that I want to point out here. So like in India, we call it a graduate, right? Are you a graduate? That means we assume you are a BA, BSc, BCom, or whatever, right? So in US, we call that degree an undergraduate degree. And then all other degrees after undergraduate are graduate degrees, like master's, your MBA, your doctoral, PhD studies, or anything after undergraduate degree is called graduate degree. So there are undergraduate programs also. A lot of students come here for undergraduate study as well after their 12th. There are different exam requirements, which we will not focus on at this stage now or today in this presentation. So, and then after degree, like a pharmacy degree or engineering degree, which are 4-year degrees, then you can admit directly to either master's, either directly PhD, or an integrated master's MS PhD program. So a lot of students, especially in the colleges like we come from, we don't know that you can directly get into the PhD program. And I didn't know when I came here that I could have applied for a PhD program. So you have to remember, this is a much easier path from the financial point of view, because most of the PhD programs provide you full scholarships. So, and I will talk about that in a minute on my another slide. So anyway, so these are different types of graduate programs. You can go for master's, you can go for an MBA, you can go for a PhD, or you can go for an integrated MS PhD. And a lot of times, some of our faculties, our teaching staff is interested in doing postdoctoral studies, or PDF, that we typically refer to in India in laboratories abroad. So those are other options for people who are post-PhD, people who are students who have PhDs in their hand. They can apply for postdoctoral fellowship, or there are other fellowships available that you can pursue. And then there are many certificate programs, but I'm not sure how useful they are for Indian students because they are typically short-term programs, and they have tuition requirements which you have to pay. So I don't know how useful they are, but I'm just putting there that you should know that there are certificate programs available like we have in our country as well. Am I going too fast or too slow? Dr. Jagtap, is it okay, the pace of the presentation? You're on mute, I cannot hear you. Okay, I cannot hear you.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Continue, sir. It's
Okay.
very nice presentation is going on, and we are all are audible.
Thank you. Okay, all right. So I'll go ahead. Okay, so now another typical question that students will face is what type of subject that you will go for, either for master's or a PhD, right? And another distinction I want to point out here is we call it a major here or a subject. So typically we ask, like in India, we ask what subject you're doing your PhD, right? Here we ask, what are you majoring in? So that's another small subtle difference how we refer to things here. So typically when you are a pharma graduate, you are aware of these traditional subjects like pharmaceutics or industrial pharmacy, pharmacology, medicinal chemistry, analytical chemistry, pharmacokinetics, biopharmaceutics, and pharmacognosy, right? These are typical subjects that we have studied in our curriculum. Now, there are other non-traditional subjects for which you can go for master's or PhD, which are like biomedical sciences. Like my PhD is in biomedical sciences. Then biotechnology, bioengineering, biophysics, cell and molecular biology. And as a pharma graduate, I think based on our curriculum and the kinds of things we are exposed to during our B Pharmacy curriculum, I think we can all pursue these other non-traditional subjects as well, because we have a fundamental knowledge of all those subjects to start your master's or PhD in those respective subjects. Like we have exposure to biochemistry, right? We have exposure to microbiology and immunology. As long as you are willing to learn new techniques and willing to take in new information, it should come easily to you, the research that is going on here. And then there are couple of other non-traditional subjects like health economics, you may not know about it, or pharma administration, which is more focused on the administrative part of the pharmaceutical industry. And this is different from, this is very similar to the MBA, the program I'm talking about, pharma administration. So there are vast varieties of different areas and topics that you can research and then decide what you want to do based on your liking or what you like to work on, in which area you like to work on. So so far, do we want to reserve questions for at the end of the presentation, or do you have any questions so far?
No, sir. We will have the interactive session once you finish with your presentation.
Okay, sounds good. So let's continue on then. Yeah. Okay, so this is one important slide. So we have to go through this carefully. So the important part here is you have to remember when you want to go to the US in what semester. So we have to understand the school year or a college year, how it works in US. So in here, so there are multiple semesters. So typical semester starts in August here. And like we start in June, right? Is that right, Dr. Jagtap? Professor Jagtap?
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes because it's been a long time for me, so I tend to forget few things. So anyway, so if we start in August here, this is a fall semester, it's called fall. Typically, that's when the trees will start shedding their leaves. So that's why it's a fall called here. So November, December, most of the trees are just skeletons here. So that's why we refer to this as a fall session. So this is the fall semester, which starts in August to December. And then there is a gap because there is a Christmas. So there is a school off and there is a colleges off for 15, 20 days here. And then we begin a spring semester in January. The spring semester goes from January to May. And then there is a summer semester from May to July. So many of the schools are off. Some universities, they run their summer semester. So you can take courses and finish your coursework early if you want. But most of the high schools, middle schools, and elementary school, they get 3 months off. Isn't that nice, right? In the US, so we don't get that many days off in India. Anyway, so that's the main information here you need to remember is which semester you want to join. Accordingly, you have to decide when to start applying for the schools, when to start giving your required examinations like GRE or TOEFL. So typically they refer to about 18 months to 24 months. You should know in advance when to start. And that's when you start preparing for this whole process. So like typically average student applies to about 5 to 7 universities or schools. Remember I told you about schools, like colleges. So you can apply to more because that gives you more flexibility to choose from if you have more acceptance letters from the university. Also, you have to balance that with your finances because each application will cost you about 15,000 to 20,000 rupees. All right, so now that's what I'm saying. So you have to plan before like about 1.5 years or 2 years before in advance. And that's what when I was, another friend of mine, Sanjay, who was in our class. So both of us were planning a similar time. So we started studying for our GRE when we were in our 3rd year. And then at the end of the final year, we had our acceptance letter in our hand that we finished our semester in May, and then we were ready to fly to US in June or July. So let's go through this process again. So make sure if you are going like from 18 months from now, you are going to the US or you want to go to the US or any other country where similar semester pattern is followed. So you have to appear for your exams, and I will talk about those exams in a minute, in somewhere between August to December timeframe. And that's before that time, you also have to request your transcripts from your school, college, or university. Typically, they ask for university attested transcripts. So for us, it's Shivaji University, right? So you'll have to go and talk to the required administrative person there to see how you can get those transcripts. Then you have to write your personal statement, which is called statement of purpose or SOP. And it's basically, you have to write down your motivation of why you want to pursue your MS or PhD in US, what led you to this decision. So you have to express your motivation behind your whatever you're trying to pursue and why that subject, why not others. So you have to write those examples, and you will find such examples online on the websites that have given Professor Jagtap. So one of that is msinus.com. So you can find there. And then you have to submit all of your application material, and which we will talk about in a minute, what that application material consists of. So usually the typical deadlines for fall semesters are some are in before December, some are in January to February timeframe. So you have to finish all your applications. You have to courier all your materials before, let's say, February, all of them, because each school or university has different deadline. So you have to know each of the deadlines for the schools you're applying to. Now, so as I said, in January to April, application deadlines are finished. You should have submitted all of your applications by then. And then there is a review happens for your application that you have sent in. So during April to June timeframe, you will hear back from the university's admission office that whether if they have admitted you or rejected your application. So basically, it's a decision-making process based on your credentials, basically your exam scores and your experience, if you have any research experience or no. And then that's the time when you want to organize your finances if you need any financial organization thing. Because if you have a, let's say if they offered you a full scholarship, then you have to do a minimum financial organization, because you can show that I already have a scholarship, so I don't need a bank loan or anything from the private banks or nationalized bank there, right? So that's an easy way to do it. If you don't have a scholarship, let's say you get admitted to the master's program with no scholarships, then you are liable to, are responsible for your tuition fees and expenses, right? Okay, and we'll talk about that again in a minute on my next few slides. Okay, so then in April to June timeframe, you will hear, and then you will have to reply back to one particular university that I am interested in your program and I wish to join your program. And for other acceptance, you have to tell them that I won't be joining your program. So basically you can choose one and then tell them so they can book your seat. Basically, like it's like that, as simple as that. Okay, so in June and August, that's where I told you, right? In August we start a semester here. So basically, so once your acceptance letter is in your hand, you tell your university that I am willing to join your program, then you start your visa process in April-June timeframe. So you book a date with the US Embassy and you submit required forms for the visa application process, and then you go for an visa interview, and they ask you typical questions: where you are going, what kind of program it is, and are you going to come back? That's the most important question, because they don't like people who wants to stay there, even though people stay there after finishing their PhD. But that's the typical question they ask. So you have to convince them basically that yes, you have your parents here, you have, let's say, your farm here, and I want to, like, you want to work in a pharma industry in India. So those, and you will find all that information, how to approach a visa interview on a lot of websites or the consultancies that are available in India. They will guide you through that process. So basically then you get your visa. So they stamp your visa in your passport. Make sure that we start all of this process that I just discussed, you have your passport, because at my time, a lot of students didn't know that we need to have a passport, because even for appearing for an exam, you need a passport. Now, these days, I know everybody is well informed. Now, most of the people have passport because the passport application process has become much easier than about 10, 12 years ago. So now, let's say you have a passport after your visa interview, and then you arrange your travel part. Basically, you book your tickets online or through an agent, and then you go to your university, basically. Now, there are some other aspects that you have to figure out where you are going to stay and whatnot, but that can be dealt later. If you have any questions after that about that, ask me once we finish our presentation. Okay, now what's the typical application process looks like? So each university that you have chosen, let's say you chose 10 different universities to apply to. So each of those 10 schools will have 10 different application forms. So you have to fill that information online, and along with that, you have to attach a pile of documents. So several of those I have mentioned here. So one is statement of purpose, or SOP, and I talked about it earlier, that you have to write about, and this should not be like more than 1.5 or 2 pages long Word document page. So you can write about your little bit about your background and what kind of research or other experience you have that led you to choose pharmacy as a profession, and then why you want to pursue education abroad. So basically you have to write a story. Like, remember, like a movie has a script, right? Has a story, right? Similarly, imagine your life as a story so far until you finish B.Pharm. So you have to write that story such a way that they will be convinced that this is the right candidate. He's a motivated student. He really wants to do the master's or PhD, right? So again, you will find more information on this on msnus.com if you have any questions. Now you have to get few letters of recommendation from your professors or teachers. 2 to 3 are enough. And then you have to request your official university undergraduate transcript, typically university attested. Then you have to send in your exam scores, TOEFL, GRE, or GMAT, depending on the type of program you're applying to. Then you have a resume or CV that you have prepared. You have to attach that. And then sometimes you have a sample of your past work. Let's say if you have done some research during your undergraduate, or if you are already a master's MPharm student who is applying for PhD, you may have published research, right? So you can attach copies of your research publications. And then you attach your financial statements. And these are important, because even if you know that you will get financial, you will get a financial aid or a scholarship, typically you still have to send in your financial statement saying that you have enough money to fund your education for 2 years. Let's say if you are applying for a master's, that typical cost here is basically you have to show you have about 20 or 30 lakhs of financial backing to you, that you can manage your studies, even though it's not needed at later stage if you get a scholarship, right? But you have to at least show them, and that can be shown via different modes. Sometimes it doesn't have to be all liquid cash in your bank account. It can be a mixture of your bank balance, your property, your farm, your gold, your LICs, your all investments. And there are ways how you can show this amount in financial statements, and even consultancies can help you with that, how to arrange that part. Okay, anyways, so these are the required examinations for going for higher education in US. So minimum requirement is you have to have a TOEFL, which is a test of English as a foreign language, TOEFL. And it costs, the application fee for that test is $180 US dollars. So about 10,000 rupees. So what do they test you on? So this test is about English, as I said. So they test you on reading, writing, listening, and speaking, 4 categories. So, and this is an easy test. So it's not, you don't have to know Shakespeare kind of English. So this is like a spoken English that we typically use. And I remember, I know this sounds easy from me now, but I was in that boat, like many of you may feel, that we don't speak English on a regular basis, right? And I didn't either. You can ask Professor Jagtap. So actually I was scared for this exam. How am I going to talk? Because I've never spoken English on when I was doing my BPharm, right? And we are not used to speaking English. But keep your fears aside. Not many people in this world speak English, right? Imagine Chinese students, right? So they also come here. Imagine some students from Africa, right? So if you have that global perspective, you can understand that there will be all sorts of students, right? So you have to prepare your best, study for the exam and go, and then present yourself confidently. That's the most important part. Okay. Now, the next exam is GRE, and most programs require GREs, but there are these days some programs which do not require GREs. Only TOEFL is enough. Okay, and you can find those online. So anyway, so GRE is a graduate record examination, and everyone, including US students, have to appear for this exam if you want to go for a graduate study. That means master's or PhD, not just international students. Okay, so, and this is typically based on 2 different areas, which is English and maths, and then there are different types of questions on each of them. So English for the GRE is typically a harder part for us, for international students, because that level of English is slightly difficult. And then there is a math, and the math part is usually easier for students in India, because they test you on the math which you have learned up till your 10th standard. So like basic geometry, basic area, trigonometry, and all that stuff. And I wasn't good at both of them. So to be frank, okay, I had to study. I did study, and I did score enough to get an admit. So, and the format has changed from when I appeared for the exam. So we had exam which is out of 1600. Now it is, I think, 320 or 300, something like that. So, but the types of questions and the focus hasn't changed much. So it's in English and maths. So, and there are various books available to get trained on this both of the parts, English and maths. So there are consultancies which run training courses, short like crash courses in India, which I had done one 1 month course in India when I was there. So anyways, and then there is a GRE subject test. Not many people know this, but if you want to go for a particular subject, let's say you want to do your PhD in biochemistry, then there will be a GRE only on biochemistry. So you can appear for that. And then you don't have to appear for this general GRE that I just talked about. So either or, a general GRE or a subject GRE. So depending on, like if we have a GATE, right? So similarly, there is a subject GRE. If you want to go for a, as I said, biochemistry or a chemistry, then you can only appear for that particular subject test, subject GRE test. Okay, so next is GMAT. Not many people pursue the MBA directly, but there is an option to go for an MBA if you are really interested in doing MBA. So there is a test called GMAT. So you can appear for that. Again, it is tested on English, based on English and maths. Now in this case, the math is much harder than the English. So you can imagine this is an MBA class. You're going to run a business, so you must be good with numbers, right? So that's why the math level here is little difficult compared to the English part. So basically, in all of those exams, they test your analytical and reasoning ability. How do you analyze information presented to you? Can you look beyond the information you have? You know, we say read between the lines. So those kinds of tests or questions are asked. And this is again time-based. So again, the math part, you have a given time limit. So you have to get really fast at solving examples. And that comes with practice, as you all know, right? So those are all, this is all about exams. Now, these are typical expenses that you will face. So as I said, you have to apply for each school, right? So typical school has an application fee somewhere between $35 to $250, depending on institution. Now, the tuition fee, again, don't get discouraged by these huge numbers here, because if you get a scholarship, all this doesn't matter, right? Okay, so tuition fees are somewhere between $15,000 to $30,000 per year. So if you have a 2-year program, it could be $30,000, and that we are talking about 20 lakhs rupees, right? So, but if you get a scholarship, this goes to zero. Okay, then your room and board, which is your living expenses, which can cost you somewhere between $5,000 to $12,000 per year. Again, if you get a PhD funding, you get a monthly stipend of about $2,000. Okay, and that's about $24,000 per year. So that also you can take care of without problem. And then university student fees, that's also sometimes rolled into a tuition fees, which is $100 to $300 per term. But many universities, if you have a PhD scholarship, they already pay for that. So these numbers seem large and sometimes students like, oh, okay, I cannot pay for that, or my parents won't allow for that. So remember, you don't have to pay everything. As long if you go and get a scholarship, you're all covered for your entire study. Anyways, and then medical and dental insurance, those are small expenses that you can easily take care of. Travel expenses to booking your tickets to come to here and go back to visit sometimes your family, that's on you. So if you have a PhD, again, you make enough money that you can easily save up some money to book your tickets if you want to go back and visit your family for a month or so in a summer month or in a December vacation time. Okay, and then living expenses. As I said, if you have a funding, if you have a scholarship, you get monthly stipend and you can manage your living expenses in that scholarship or stipend that you get. And I will talk about what kind of stipends you get in a minute. Okay, so the funding for your program varies by field. So most of the science and engineering, if you apply for a PhD program, almost all of them, to my knowledge so far, get scholarship. If you get an admit, you get a funding for PhD program. Not all master's programs offer you funding. You probably typically less than 50% master's program offer funding based on how good of the candidate you are, how good scores you have in your GRE and TOEFL exam scores. Business, law, and other profession, there is a like MBA, there is a very rare that you will get a full funding. and typically students go for bank loans. Okay, so where you can get more information about financial aid or where you can get money from, right? So US universities, of course, if they offer you scholarship, good to go, no problem with that. Indian government has a Ministry of Education, and they also offer certain scholarships. And you can again search on Google about what kind of scholarships they have, and you can get more information. Actually, you can call them and see if they can give you more information. But before that, I would do a thorough research online first, right? And Delhi is not far from Mumbai, so you can take a train and go to Delhi, stay there for a couple of days, go visit the Indian Ministry of Education and get all the information you need. So that's the best way to do it. And then there are private foundations. I don't know how many are there. You will have to do an online research. I haven't done much research on private foundations, but I know there are trusts like Ratan Tata Trust, right, in India, which offer some scholarships to students. And then there are bank loans. Of course, that's everybody knows about bank loans. They offer education loans. Typically, if you have an acceptance letter from US university, they can give you a bank loan. Okay, so these are different types of stipends that you get monthly when you come here for a master's or PhD. So there's a teaching assistantship. So basically, you teach a lab course, like you have practicals, right? And then there is someone who is teaching practicals. So typically in the US, senior students in the department, they help with conducting those practicals. Right? That's a teaching assistantship. Sometimes you teach 1 or 2 courses throughout the semester, and then you get paid for that. The other way you get paid for is a research assistantship. Basically, the professor has some grant money that he's got from it's a federal money or central government money. And then he has some money to pay for someone to do that research. And that's you, because you are doing that research for him. It's either master's or PhD. And then there is a graduate assistantship, which is usually paid by the department or a school or university. So there are different programs through which university gets money to pay to the students. So these are 3 typical ways masters or PhD students get paid for their work in US. Okay, now lot depends on the professor here. So why do I say that? Now, typically in India, most of the exams and everything is conducted by university, right? Not the professor. But that's exactly opposite in US here. So the typical course which is taught by a professor is owned by the professor, basically. Owned by professor means he decides what kind of exams to give, what kind of assignments to give to students, and how the grading looks like. So grading is A to D, right? The grade that you get based on your score. Like if you get somewhere between 90 to 100, that means A, 80 to 90 is B, and so on, right? So that's universal here in all universities. But the exam part, the assignment part, and the structure of the course is entirely determined by the professors. So professor has a lot of power in doing what he wants to do in the university. So he gets the money, so he can decide who to pay that money to the students, right? So although he gets it to the university, communicate with the professor. So if you are, let's say you found 5-7 schools that you are interested in, and then what you can do is you can start expressing your interest and why you are interested in that lab. So basically the prerequisite is you have to do a thorough research on universities and professors you want to work with, right? Then you can find that information on the school's website or look at his research papers he published previously. And then that email comes. Sometimes they won't reply, sometimes they will reply how busy they are, but don't get discouraged if someone doesn't reply. Just follow up again after a week or 2 weeks and remind him about the email and ask him politely that I'm interested in this, and what's going on in your lab? Can I be part of that lab? And what is expected of me? So those kinds of things, you have to ask good questions to build a relationship beforehand. So if you build a good relationship with professors beforehand, and then you apply, and then your professor already knows you, right? he can talk to the graduate admission office and he can give a verbal recommendation that I want this student in my lab. So could you offer him a position here in our university, right? So now typically this, most of the times it will work, many times it doesn't work. So depending on how good of a student you are, how good scores you have. But this is the way, this is one way to increase your chances of getting a funding and admission. Okay, so types of funding, there is another aspect to it. There are universities where we talk about in-state tuition and out-of-state tuition. So we don't have to understand this word really deeply, but let me tell you, if you get some kind of scholarship, even if you get a partial scholarship, let's say a one-time $2,000 scholarship when you join the school, what that does is, if there is a thing called in-state tuition in that university or out-of-station thing in that university, your tuition fee is reduced by 70%. So let's say your fee was $10,000 per year. So now you need to only pay $3,000. And there are a lot of universities that offer in-state and out-of-state waivers. And again, you will have to do a search depending on what universities you're applying to. So typically when I was in New York, north side of the United States, those universities don't offer this option. But many of the southern universities in southern part of the US, there is a thing called in-state and out-of-state tuition. So you can take advantage of that. Okay, where and how to do research, right? Of course, Google and university web pages. And there are a couple other websites like US schools, and then there is MS in US. There is I'm trying to remember, I'm not remembering, but there are a couple of links I have sent. Professor Jagtap, you can refer to those links and you can do all of your research on those universities via those links. Okay, now what are the other factors that you need to consider here? Oh, sorry, I was just doing my time check. So we have, okay, I'm exceeding my time limit anyway. So I'll try to be brief here from here now onwards. So basically other factors you have to consider: your personal and family support, right? And many times your family is not supportive of certain decisions that you make. Sometimes they are, and I was fortunate once that my parents supported me when I decided to go abroad for my US education. So then where you want to go in the US for your master's or PhD, how is the weather there? For example, in the north side of the United States, it usually gets really cold in the winter. Like you have a snow for about 3-4 months, right? So that if you don't like that, then you can move slightly to the central US locations or the southern part of the US. Like I'm in the Texas, where it's very much like India, very hot in summers. Like June, July, August will hit temperatures like 41 degrees centigrade or somewhere around that. And then sometimes some people have friends in particular part of the US or family, so you want to go in that area. So choose your location around that. Some universities offer internships after your program finishes, so that those are good, again, programs. So because you get to work in a company or a academic settings or a center, which could offer you a job after your internship, right? So those are other factors. Then student services. Many universities have international student associations. Basically, these help students when they arrive new on campus, right? You don't know who to contact, right? So this is the association you need to get in touch with. Once you get an admit, check with them if they have an international student association, and then you can get in touch with them, and they will help you, like pick you up from the airport, give you the temporary accommodation before you find a permanent apartment or a flat to stay in during your program. Then you have to look at the faculty profiles if you like the faculties, then cost versus your scholarship, have a scholarship or not, and the size of the department. Sometimes there are big departments like 20-30 faculties, and then there are sometimes small departments like 5 faculties or 10 faculties, and that affects how the research and everything goes. So those are other factors to consider before you choose. So what happens after your master's or PhD, right? So you get to work in US. Yes, so there is a US, if you are in a STEM field, you are allowed to work for 20 months without any other visa requirements. you can work for 29 months, almost 2.5 years on your student. But what happens after that? So once you get a job after you finishing your PhD or masters, but remember, finding a job is on you. Of course, there are resources like there is a career center, and there are people who will help you prepare for interviews or help you apply for jobs. But cracking the interview and getting a job, like in India, right? It's on you. Now, what happens after you finish your OPT, which is your student visa? Then your employer needs to file for your H-1B visa. And you may hear that in the newspapers, right? The President Trump is doing this and doing that to the H-1B visa, right? That's the typical visa, working visa you get. Now, there are, for example, if you are a PhD from India and then you want to apply for postdoc positions here, either you get a H-1B visa or you get a J-1 visa. So that's another kind of visa you get. So the visa requirements are country specific. So this is information is about US, and UK has a different visa or tier system. The Italy, Germany, Australia, and New Zealand, they have different visa systems, and you can get more information on respective university websites. Anyways, so what I want you to take home today, message here is, remember, if you want to go for MS, you have to choose schools or colleges that offer you funding or partial scholarship, or at least an in-state tuition, which will reduce your tuition fee by almost 70%. It's better to go for MS and PhD integrated program because most of the times they will offer you full scholarship. Again, PhD programs are a nice choice. B.Pharm students can apply for directly PhD. Now, another caveat here is having a work experience in India. That's my recommendation to you as well. If you don't want to go immediately after your B.Pharm, I would suggest go get a work experience in academia, whatever, like work in industry for 1 year or 2 in R&D, F&D, or clinical research, and then apply to that particular route. Let's say you want to work in R&D. So you go after B.Pharm, work in R&D for a couple of years, and then you apply for master's or PhD in pharmaceutics or pharmacology. Now, why am I saying that? Because once you finish the program in US here, you start applying for jobs here, right? Now it shows on your resume that you have experience working in that particular department, right? And it helps to get a job, right? Because having experience helps get a job. We know that, we all know that, right? So when I was doing all of this process, I didn't know about that. And I didn't know about that you can apply to PhD. So now you have that information in your hand, right? So use that to your advantage. You don't have to prepare for a GRE in your 3rd year or 4th year. You can go work after B.Pharm for a couple of years and prepare for GRE and TOEFL during that time, and then apply for a master's or PhD, which will give you an edge over other candidates